Good morning, Athens, and welcome to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. Education Matters is sponsored by Ellison's Professional Services and your local internet station, MIU Radio Athens. You can check it out at miuradioathens.com. My name is Fidrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Fallon Green, Joshua Henderson.
Today on Education Matters, we will be doing our back-to-school show with our guest, Patricia Clifton. But before we start today's show, we will have Joshua with our words to grow on.
Thank you, Fidrell. And this week's words to grow on are, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall, by Nelson Mandela.
Thank you, Josh. Now, Mrs. Clifton, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, could you introduce the audience to who you are and a little bit about your background and your childhood?
Okay. I'm Patricia Clifton. I have been here in Athens for over 50 years. 40 years. And I have two daughters, both of whom are graduates of the Clark County School District. And I have three wonderful grandchildren. And I have spent the last years of my career, the 12 years I spent as principal of Hillsman Middle School, and once I retired from Hillsman, I went to the university for 8 years. I served as a coordinator for the Young Scholars Program with the College of Agricultural and Environmental Scientists. And our goal there was to introduce high school students to elite scientists so that they would have an opportunity to see how the scientific world worked. We were finding that a lot of the students were failing once they got to college because they did not have, first of all, a really good sense of science instruction, and then they did not have that lab experience because a lot of the high schools at that time, now I'm talking about back in the 80s, did not have really labs that were commensurate with the college labs. So we did that program, and I started the program here in Athens with 9 students, and it was very successful that year. We went from 9 to, I think, 20, and then to 30, and I found that 25 was the optimum number to manage. So today, the program still exists. And there have been over 400 students that graduated from the school at the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences. All of those students have gone on to do great things, and I think that's the good thing about it. As far as my education, I graduated from Miami Northwestern High School in Miami, Florida. I went to Tuskegee University, and I got a degree in sociology, psychology, and education at Tuskegee, and I met my lifelong partner, my husband, Ivory Clifton, while at Tuskegee. Unfortunately, Ivory passed 2.5 years ago, but we left Tuskegee and had a military career. And then after the military career, we came back to Washington, D.C. for a short time. And then from Washington, D.C., we came to Athens. So we've been here since.
I notice when you talk about Athens, it kind of sounds like you're not really from here. Can you explain to me, a little bit about where, your journey was before you got to Athens?
Yes. I guess people say you can live in Athens, but until you're really born in Athens, you're not from Athens as such, and I don't expound to that, but I make sure people know that, I was not born here in Athens, but I do have a lovely daughter who was born here in Athens and a granddaughter who was born here in Athens. So we managed to have our Athens flavor endowed in the family. But I was born in Miami, Florida. I am, just so you get the numbers right, because some things will sound strange as we talk about educational issues later on. I'm 78 years old, and so that puts you back to, I graduated from high school in 1963. There was no such thing as a cell phone. So if you can just leave that as a part of your understanding there. But once I left Tuskegee, I again went with my husband, and I had in the military, and I taught in Virginia, and I taught in Washington, D.C. area, and then I came to Clark County.
What was your reason for joining the military?
My husband was in the military.
Oh.
Yeah. And if back then, because my husband was an officer, you were really embroiled with your husband's activities as well. He spent a year in Vietnam, and while he was in Vietnam, I stayed and I taught fourth grade in Petersburg, Virginia, which is where he was stationed. And then he came back. And so I had first grade as well at Petersburg, Virginia.
Tell me a little bit more about what schooling was like for you. Not necessarily when you were teaching, but when you were going to school, and kind of compare that to what it was like, what school is like now.
Okay. The one thing that I would say, and this, I don't know if this is just unique to my family, but there was a real focus and a real appreciation for education. The teachers were respected. I mean, you could not say anything or do anything. The teachers were in charge. And I know that my parents respected that. And the one thing, I can give you an example, and this is when I was in 12th grade. I was taking physics at the time, and one of my physics teacher saw me taking my books out of the locker. Now, this is how the teachers were observing. And she saw me take my physics book out of the locker. But when I got in class, I had my homework completed. So her question was, how did I complete my homework if my book was in the locker? But we had this group that we would meet. A lot of the kids would meet during the early mornings, and we would get together and compare notes and so forth. And so I was able to do my homework using someone else's book. Well, she called my mother and told my mother that she didn't understand how Miss Davis, which was my maiden name, did her work if she didn't have her book, and she expected me to have my book. So when I got home, my mother was livid because, in her words, I had embarrassed the family that the teacher had to call because I didn't have my book. So there was closer monitor in children then, and the teacher respected the parents respected the teacher, and there was that communication bond, and you dare not say a word as a student, okay? So I explained it to my mom, but she said, the next time you come home from school, I'm going to see the physics book first. And that was the end of that. So it was different. So that's it.
What do you feel like some of the most important changes, whether they're good changes or bad changes, are with how schooling has evolutionized and changed?
Well, there are a lot of changes, and some of them are, what shall I say, they're policy related, and then some of them are at just family related or individual related. And so when you deal with the policy issues, those are issues that come about, more so with your school boards or your state board of education or your federal education. And some of that you have to weave through based on the political, most of it is, and now it's even more political landscape. But when you're talking about just in your family, person to person, I see that parents may or may not be as involved as they were when I was growing up, and that just depends. There was just no doubt that everybody went to school. There, it was like a parade from a neighborhood if there was something going on, and it was not left to the parents. Didn't leave everything to the teachers. There was collaboration there, and so now it's more like. Well, it is what it is, and it just varies.
Going back to what we were talking about with the situation you brought up with you in school, it kind of sounded like teachers were a lot more attentive with how students were, completing their work. Like they were more in detail with making sure you had your books and you had your resources. Would you say that has changed?
Oh, very much so. There's no doubt about it. Every teacher that I had, I've just quoted one situation, but every teacher that I had knew us individually, and in many instances, they knew the family. And I guess part of it was because I grew up with neighborhood schools, and we, for whatever reasons, that's another topic, we got rid of neighborhood schools, okay? And so my parents could see the teacher in the grocery store, they went to church with the teachers, etc. And not 100% all the time, but for the most part, there was that connection between the teachers and the family, the whole family as a whole. So they knew you. They might not know you personally that well, but they knew you, okay? There was nobody that was slipping, that somebody didn't care for all the time.
Another thing that I took from that situation that you brought up was that your parents seemed to be very, very strict when it came to your education, and you were very attentive with your education, and you were very, very naturally gifted. Would you say that you always wanted to be a teacher in your life? Oh
no, I didn't want to be a teacher at all. The teacher was what shall I say was. It was what I did for convenience with my husband. That's when I went into education. My goal, I was going to be a medical social worker. That was my goal when I came out of high school and into college. But I got to Tuskegee, honestly, and I met my husband, and I knew that he was going to have, my boyfriend, I knew he was going to have a military career, and I needed something that was portable.
Thank you, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
Welcome back to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. My name is Patricia Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Fallon Green
and Joshua Henderson.
Before we continue today's show, we will have Fallon Green with our history fact.
Near Niagara Falls on this day in 1814, British troops commanded by General Phineas Rail thwarted an invasion of Canada by a U.S. force under General Jacob Brown in the Battle of Lundy's Lane during the War of 1812. This has been your History Fact, sponsored by MU Radio Athens.
Thank you, Trey. Now, Mrs. Clifton, I want to get more into your career as a teacher and a little bit more about your journey from that to eventually becoming the principal. So explain to me what it was like, the atmosphere was like when you first started teaching, and how the atmosphere shifted, how the atmosphere is different from teaching now in today's world.
Okay, thank you. I began my teaching career in 1967 in Petersburg, Virginia. And that was because my husband was stationed at Petersburg. Once we left Tuskegee, his military assignment was Petersburg, Virginia. And we would be there. We were stationed there just for about 6 months because he was scheduled to go to Vietnam in December. So we knew it would be thought it would be a short stay. But I had first grade at the time, and I had 32 first graders in a class, and it was in one of the poorest areas in Petersburg. And of course, at that time, we were talking about segregation, so all of my students were African American. The supplies, the difference in the supplies at this was Blandford Elementary, and what was at the other school, which I was later transferred to, involuntarily transferred, I might say. But when it came to Christmas or any of the holidays, I can remember specifically Christmas and St. Patrick's Day, we did not have red construction paper in our school. So I had to go, and back in those days, construction paper was one of the big things that I would do with my students. All of my students, for the most part, were on free and reduced lunch, and there was no breakfast program in the school. So having first graders, a number of them came to school, and you could tell they were hungry, and so what I did at that time was I arranged to have the day-old bread from the bakery, and at the commissary I was able to get peanut butter and orange juice, and so everybody, so that no one would feel bad about having to eat before lunch, I designed a breakfast program for our kids. And so that's how we did. And then once that was over, we started our reading groups or math groups. And back in those days, we had the traditional teaching style then was 3 groups. And so the class was divided into 3 groups. And so you'd have something for each group to do. But I sat with one group and listened to them read, or I read to them and then they repeated to me. So that was sort of the style. A year after I was there, the superintendent integration was coming to Petersburg. So the superintendent came to the schools and was observing the teachers that he wanted transferred to the predominantly white school, or the all-white school. So I was involuntarily transferred. I did not want to go because I love working with the students there, but because my husband was in Vietnam and I talked to him about it, he said, don't wrinkle any or ruffle any feathers, Pat. Just go and do what you got to do until I come back. So I went to the other school and taught 4th grade. And when I got there, I was just amazed that there was construction paper that was turning gray on the ends because there was so much construction paper there. And I remember the times that we struggled to get enough construction paper through the 4 first grade classes that we had at Blandford for the kids to do their artwork. So that was the first time I came face to face with inequities in education. And it changed my whole way that I approached teaching students and looking at students and looking at how schools are funded or what assets go to one school and not to another.
Now, with that scenario, how does that compare to, schooling now? Would you say that all schools now have equal supplies and resources and get equal treatment, or would you say that it's still, there's still like two ends of the spectrum where one school gets treated better than the other?
I think we've tried to eradicate that lack of equity through a number of programs, through a number of things that have happened, mostly through legislation and so forth. Also through the idea of integrating the schools. You no longer have the neighborhood schools, so you don't have schools that are all black, that are, for the most part, that are not adequately funded or adequately resourced. Now, what happens otherwise? There are any number of reasons why there may be inequities, but I know that as far as what is supposed to happen, everybody is supposed to have equal access to whatever resources and materials are there.
I wanted to ask you, what has teaching in the different amount of settings that you've taught in kind of shown you or taught you about education as a whole?
That when it really comes down to it, in the classroom, you've got two things going for you. You've got a teacher and you've got time. That's all you have. And as a principal, I made sure that the people that I chose to teach in the classroom were the absolute best, that they would be people that I want to teach my own children. So that's the one factor. And then the second factor is time. How much time do you have on task? So as a principal, you have to make sure that all the distractions are eliminated to the most that you can, because time is that other factor that allows the teacher to do what the teacher needs to do. So we're talking about a quality person in front of the children, and then quality time for that person to do whatever they're going to do. Everything else is sort of, it matters, but it doesn't matter. When you get to the core, that's what really matters for me.
Yes, ma'am. And speaking of time, obviously, saying your first teaching job was in 1967.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So you've been teaching for a very long time. When it comes to time, how do you feel like there are any aspects that you might have had or incorporated in your teaching back then that you do now or don't now, or how has that changed over the years?
Well, what happens also is there are a number of things that come to schools as they may be community related, and then they come to the school and ask the school to help fix this. Let's just say, for instance, the one thing that came was, and I'll just say this, there are others, but there was this thing called Red Ribbon Week, okay? I'm sure you all are familiar with that. But anyway, that's an issue that schools were asked to help identify and help educate about drugs and so forth, and Red Ribbon Week and so forth. Really and truly, that should have been somewhere else, not in the classroom, as far as I'm concerned, for time, because that takes away from what is really necessary. I'm going to say the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. So we have to be careful what we bring into the school, as whether or not it is really at the heart of what it's going to take for our young people to get where they need to be in their educational journey. And, pardon me for choosing Red Ribbon Week, but that's just one that I personally balked at as principal because it took time that could have been placed somewhere else.
Yes, ma'am. I'm actually happy that you answered that, speaking about Red Ribbon Week, because my next question is going to be, what is something that you feel should be greatly, like it can be something that's not implemented or something that is implemented, but something that should be greatly improved among school districts, like just overall, like some of the main things? It can be a policy, a rule, standards.
Well, right now, one of the things that I found, I have a grandson that's going to be a senior this year, and one of the things that I found that he was taking, and I thought of this too, was that we need to really teach financial literacy. So that we understand finances and we understand how it works, and we need to understand investment. And it does not, but that's something that takes you all the way through your life. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to have, well, it all depends. But if you have that understanding, I think, and that's something that is not a standard across the districts.
Another topic I'd like to get into, and this is another issue with schools. We did a show about the school attendance rates a couple months back, and one thing we noticed from reading one of the articles on Athens Banner Herald was that the attendance rates at schools, mainly in Cedar Shoals and Clark Central, were at an extremely low rate. Would you say that has something to do with interest in school? And do you think the interest in school has been lost compared to how interested students during your era were? And if so, what is the cause of that?
Well, truancy has always been an issue. It's always been, we used to have what was called the truant officer. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but that was someone who really knew the community and knew when children should not be, out of school. And mostly it was someone who was, I'll use terms back in my day, trying to play hooky for whatever reason, and he would just simply round them up and bring them back to school. So it may have been someone who was not really doing well in school, but for the most part, you had someone who could immediately take care of that situation, and that student was brought to school. And I think the issue was more quickly identified that here's a child in trouble for whatever reason.
And on that note, we'll be taking a quick break.
Are you serious? Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
Welcome back to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. My name is Fadrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Fallon Green
And Joshua Henderson.
Before we continue the rest of our show today, we will have Fallon Green with our health fact.
An infected person is contagious for up to 7 days after flu symptoms appear. This is why the flu is able to spread so quickly and easily in the workplace or home. The flu can show up in any time without warning. Flu symptoms can last between 5 to 10 days before full recovery. This has been your Health Fact, sponsored by Drug Free Athens.
Thank you, Fallon. Now, Mrs. Clifton, another issue that I'd like to get into when it comes to like the schools is school disorderly, like fighting in hallways and skipping classes and all of that. A lot of the disturbances, a lot of the stuff that happens in school that really causes disturbance for learning. Could you say that? I mean, could your generation relate to that? Did you have any of that going on? Was it as frequent as it is now?
I am sure that there have always been fights in school, but I don't remember anything like what we have now. I guess the frequency and the level of, but there again, you had people who were close, and you pretty much knew if a child was having trouble or what have you. And so the whole idea of a resource officer in the school and needing the police was unheard of, back in my day. I don't remember that at all. And I'll call you if that did happen. But I think what has happened recently is that a number of children, for whatever reason, have been left behind, and they can't really, or they don't see themselves as fitting into the educational environment. So the disturbance comes when they may feel that they're so overwhelmed that they either have to get up and walk out of class, or the last thing they want is for anyone to know that they don't know, or that there's a shortcoming. Okay, that's an emotional piece. The other thing that happens maybe is that whomever is in charge of the instruction really needs to make an analysis of where the students are in order to plan that classroom instruction. I was taught that you do an analysis of your class, no matter what it is, like a pretest for everyone as a teacher, and you begin to see who knew what, and therefore you could gauge your instruction based on that, all the prerequisites. So it eliminated, to some degree, a kid or a situation coming up where someone would be completely embarrassed if something came up, or the teacher asked them a question, or you were asked to go to the board and what have you. I can remember cringing as a child when I had to go to the board and do a math problem, okay? But I also remember my teacher being very nurturing and saying, and also setting the rules in the classroom. No one was going to get upset if someone else got it wrong or what have you. You were going to be nurtured and helped through that. So it's a different way, but I'm not sure. A lot of the instructional modes have changed since I was in the classroom. You've got a lot of things done online, and kids are asked to do a number of things, and you don't always have the opportunity to ask questions and get things filtered out beforehand. So again, the teaching modality is different. But I think a nurturing teacher who can recognize a student who may not be up to snuff can really and truly sort of mitigate some of what happens. Now, other disturbances, I must say, come because of things that happen in the community that a teacher or no one in the school could even know about. Okay, I mean, violence can erupt over something that's happening that actually comes to the school, and that's the sad thing that happens these days. You get so much that comes to the school that is really not of the school's making.
And a lot of the, I hear what you're saying. A lot of the people that I talk to about this, they like to say that the teachers are supposed to handle this, but really, one thing I keep hearing a lot is the help really starts at home.
It does. You
have to, nurture your kids to make sure they get on the right path, and the teachers make sure that they, stay the course.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I want to clarify, are you still in the education business? Are you still teaching or anything like that, or are you retired?
I am retired. I retired in 1999. But I went to the university after that for 8 years and worked as a program coordinator for the Young Scholars Program. So my teaching is now for my grandchildren.
I want to get your opinion. You had brought up resource officers. I did a little research before the show, and the program for school resource officers, I believe, started in 1955 in Flint, Michigan.
Uh-huh.
It was to, let the kids know that, the police were friendly and that they were not someone to be feared.
Right.
But, in my day, when I go to school, when I see school resource officers, they're not really, what you consider like the friendly type. They don't really come up to you to, dap you up or say hello or ask how you're doing. It's like kind of like they're there to really like preserve the order.
Yes.
Would you say that? I want to get your opinion on the school resource officer program and whether you think it's a good thing for the education system or not.
Okay, I don't believe in policing children. I think that somehow we need to find a way to have security in the school without the appearance that there's something bad happening here, someone with a gun on their side, and that's the environment. It's the nature of the environment. So there's a way to have schools secured without having that, like you're saying, that fear factor and so forth. I grew up with the Officer Friendly, I believe was a program that we had back in the day, where we learned about police officers and certainly what they did. But I just believe that you can take care of children if everybody's on the same page, and I mean everybody, the parents and everybody, without that policing atmosphere in the schools. And you can work on the school's perimeters and that kind of thing, and the attitude of the children when they come to school. One of the things I wanted to say was that if you're looking at schools and what it takes to get ready for schools, I think that a parent's attitude needs to be, what shall I say, redeveloped and reestablished. Like, what if I'm the parent? Okay, what is it that I need to do to ensure my child's success for this year? And one of those things is to make sure that my child goes to school and is safe, but that my child exercises safety and is not going to do something that is against the rules. So that all starts with a commitment from the parent, getting with the students and knowing their students and what they're going to do. I mean, you hear of these things and parents say, "Oh, I had no idea he was doing this. I had no idea." Well, to me, that's inexcusable. A parent needs to know what their kids are doing, and being a nosy parent is what you're supposed to be.
I also think, to add on to that something, I went to this gang violence convention not too long ago and recorded for them. And one thing that the resource officer that was there, who he's hired in Athens to handle gangs and things like that, something that he kept reiterating to the parents is the stigma that your children or grandchildren don't have anything to say, or they can't think of anything, or they don't know anything, needs to disappear. Because I feel like some of the disconnect between parents and their kids isn't really them just like not paying attention to what their kids doing, but there's this thing that's like, they're kids, they don't know any better. I can't really, they're not going to tell me nothing interesting. They're not going to tell me nothing I need to know. And then when things happen, or they find out their kids involved in something, they're like, I didn't know. The whole time the kid was probably trying to tell them, but you had this little veil up thinking they're a kid, they can't tell me anything. That's I think that's kind of something that needs to be talked about more.
Well, I agree with you, and you hit the nail on the head, because parents need to understand that they have the most important role in educating their children. And they need to accept that role and accept the pain and the payoff. And the pain sometimes comes when you've got to really set some parameters. You've got to spend some time doing some things you didn't want to do. And you have to give up some of your freedom, luxuries, whatever, in order to make sure that the children have those things. And I can give you just one example of a child, just a wonderful young man that got into trouble. And he got into trouble because his mom would not give him the money to catch the bus. Okay? And not getting the money to we bus, he got a ride with someone else. And therein was the payoff in every. It's a long story. We don't have enough time. But I'm just saying that parents have to understand that a child needs to be validated. And they need to be validated in their own way. How you validate child one may be very different from how you validate child two. But that's your child, that's your commitment, and that's what we must do. I think we've really, in education, if I'll say anything else, we've wasted a lot of time and money in not really shoring up, educating our parents in how to help educate their children. We put a lot of programs in schools, but we need to have those resources going back to the home, and would there be some accountability in the home for those children and those parents to do that.
Thank you, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh, that's a good one.
Excellent question.
That's a great question.
You are listening to Education Matters, where great questions get asked and answered.
Welcome back to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. My name is Jarrell Green, and joining me are my co-hosts,
Alan Green
and Joshua Henderson.
Now, Mrs. Clifton, in this last segment, I would like to talk about the current school year, the upcoming school year. As you may know, I am a senior at Cedar Shoals High School. My brother is a sophomore at Cedar Shoals High School. It's been, for me, I'd say, a rough 4 years. I didn't really have a full 9th grade year. I didn't even have really a 10th grade year. I can really say that I've only spent 3 years, maybe even 2, actually being in the school environment, learning, like in a traditional school environment. I'd like to get your take on, how the pandemic, something that no other generation of students has ever had to deal with, how that may have affected, the class of 2023 and beyond.
Okay. The first thing I would say is congratulations.
Thank you.
Because you made it through a very difficult time and through a really time that no one, like you said, has had before. So I think I was thinking about this in another circumstance. We all can consider ourselves survivors. And I think we ought to come through this next school year with a lot of gratitude. There may be some things that we're missing, but the idea is you now have an opportunity to go forward in a way that is like a fresh start. You can't get the past back. There's no way you're going to do that. But you can look at it and shore up those things that will propel you through the future. If there was, say, some classes were not as easy to get through virtually as others, and if I realize, applying for college, if there is, say, I'm just going to pick one out of the hat, if there's like a writing, like you have to prepare for that college essay, and you may not have had enough time or enough instruction in that, I'd find a way to get a tutor or someone, talk with a counselor about that. Hopefully, there will be conversations with the school and where they will look at, a post-COVID environment and things that can happen. But I would just like to say congratulations to all the educators and to all the students who have come through this pandemic, because I think the schools did it best in terms of making sure that things continued. It is unfortunate, and this is my opinion, that the teachers weren't paid as well as some other professions for the difficult times that they had and so forth. So, but there again, that's the way education is. But if I were in your case, I would look. I would start looking at my colleges and looking at the requirements that they have and try to get as much of an opportunity to visit and to go forth and try to find out what the prerequisites are so that you can have that done, well in advance. But I think, it's something that has happened. We can't do anything about it. The thing we do is, thank the Lord that we survived it, and we know better now. And what we want to do is continue those protocols that would keep us from, after all, COVID has not gone away. We're acting as if we're in a non-COVID environment, but the virus is still there. And until we keep those protocols going, we're not going to reduce it. We're going to get other strands of it. And we just need to be mindful of that.
All right. And as we're speaking about moving on and being grateful, going on to the next school year, those of you that have been listening to Education Matters for a while know that I was a high schooler when I was on Education Matters, and I just finished my freshman year of college, getting ready to go into my sophomore year of college. And I just wanted to ask Fredrell and Trey what they're looking forward to in their next years of high school.
Well, for me, in my last year of high school, I'm looking forward to making sure that I do the best I can in Career Academy, because I'll be taking college course classes.
That's clutch.
Thank you. Making sure that I recognize, because I don't think I've recognized, that I'm in a good situation. Like, I feel like that I've been underestimating myself, and putting too much of a chip on my shoulder because of this pandemic, really. And it's something that I don't really talk much about in person, like to people, or anything else, any other factors that may have not necessarily gotten in my way, but have become a roadblock. Another thing is, I really want to treat this as like a kind of like a last ride with my friends. Like, make sure I can get to know more about my friends and my peers that I may not have asked them about. Take a lot of those risks that I never really made, and hopefully have a successful future career in college.
Me personally, I'm just looking forward to excelling in my sophomore year, learning more about some of the stuff I previously learned about, and also really knowing my friends a lot more, like my brother said. And another thing is like probably doing a lot more to further my stuff I do outside of the classroom stuff, so I can be preoccupied with other things outside the classroom as well. I also think that my I think I can improve my ethic in terms of how I, work a lot of the times as well, and improve like how my performance and like stuff I'm not too good at, such as math, perhaps. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one little piece of advice I would give you guys, especially you, Trey, because you got the most time left. In high school, you don't want to look back and think about things that you could have tried or could have done. Just all I would say is kind of take a chance to do almost everything you can do while you're in high school, and that's not necessarily exclusive to the school. Like, for instance, for me, obviously I did Education Matters. I played varsity football for Clark Central, ran track and field there, and in the community I did chess and community. I was the president of the Kappa League chapter in Athens. It's a lot of things to do. I feel like it's better, this is just my opinion, I feel like it's better to spend time doing things interactive like that, or something that's community service. Not only can you build your resume and it can help you get into schools, it can also give you countless opportunities than just kind of, spending your free time not doing anything, if that makes sense. And also what I've found, especially in our community, that more than often when people just have a lot of time on their hands, they end up getting in some type of trouble or something bad starts happening near to them. So I would just say community-wise and also high school-wise was just like sporting events, clubs, things like that. Just try to get involved. It enhances the high school experience. Especially since we're coming off this pandemic and times where we weren't able to go to school at all with our peers. I think it's very important to do so.
Yeah.
Another thing I'd like to get into with you, Mrs. Clifton, is I don't know if you've been watching the news about this specific issue, but a lot of the governments, the people in government have been trying to, place bans on certain subjects in the classroom, like critical race theory and anything like that. I'd like to get your take on that matter and whether or not you believe in that.
Okay. First of all, I think that a person's culture has to be validated through that person. And so, or through their family. So the idea of feeling bad that they have taken, certain cultural things out of it, critical race theory, basically they're trying to avoid you understanding the terrible thing that happened, the whole idea of slavery and everything that related to that. But I think that it is the duty of every family to pass on their personal heritage. And no one can do that better than their family. All of us have a family tree, and I don't know one family tree that I've thought of, even the quote-unquote royals, where there aren't some limbs that are broken. And so you have to live with that. There is no ultimate perfection, and that kind of thing. So I think, what we as African Americans should do is realize that, okay, we may not get Black history taught in the schools as such, but let's look at ways that we can impart the goodness of our survival and the good things that have happened with our culture on our own. And so I see churches needing to step up to ensure that is done, and community organizations need to make sure that is done. I actually, when I started listening to all of this, thought, what could be worse than to have someone teaching something that they really don't know about? And teaching our kids, or any kids, something that's going to make them feel minimized. And that's the thing that I see. If you put it in the classroom, just out there for anybody to teach, you may not get the full essence and the greatness of our heritage. And so I think that it behooves us, and I mean everybody, to start telling those stories to make your kids feel good about themselves. And I'll just say this, and you can take it for what it's worth. My younger daughter married a young man from Nigeria. And we were talking about, while they were dating, what was the difference between the Nigerian young men and African American young men. And she said, Mom, the biggest thing is they don't see themselves as inferior. But American culture through the years have taught African American males that they are somehow inferior, and they have to work their way back from that ingrained thought that there's something inherently inferior with them. So if we could raise a generation of children who don't feel inferior, then we can do wonderful things. But when you feel that you are always got to validate yourself or what have you, and I think that's the difference between kids who have gone to HBCUs. They don't have to worry about having to be revalidated all the time. And they don't have to worry about being in spaces where they may not be appreciated and so forth. So, therein lies the difference. I just believe that you teach your own and you share the goodness of it, because we as a people have a lot to be proud of, and we have survived a whole lot. And I think for various reasons, all political, they want that squashed. And so I'm saying, so you don't teach it in the schools where you're dealing with public dollars, but you can teach it in your house when you're dealing with your own.
Yes, ma'am. And as this show is coming closer to the ending, we must ask you the essential question that we ask all our guests, which is, why does education matter to you?
Well, education matters to me because it is the sure way for you to have a fulfilled life, and not just education book-wise, but to learn about other cultures, to learn about other people. Education is multifaceted. And I think, I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm always interested in something, new, and I don't hesitate to try something new. And I think that education matters because that's how we grow as individuals, and that's how we help teach our children, and we can reach back to the next generation. So education does matter.
Thank you, Mrs. Clifton. And thank you for listening to Education Matters, the official voice of the youth. Education Matters is sponsored by Ellison's Professional Services and your local internet station, MU Radio Athens. You can check it out at MURadioAthens.com. If you missed any portion of this show, or would like to hear it again, it could be heard Monday at 5:30 or Thursday at 10 a.m. Education Matters can also be heard on our YouTube channel, Education